So, should chanters use a tuning fork when they chant? So, what is a tuning fork, first of all? It's a device, a little handheld thing that gives you the absolute pitch of a given note to be used as a reference point for determining a good starting pitch for a hymn. The use of a tuning fork is pretty common in choirs and Western music, but we often see chanters using them and advocating for their use. So there are disadvantages, there are advantages and disadvantages to using a tuning fork as a chanter, and we're going to discuss those in this video. But before we get started, if you're interested in learning Byzantine music, especially if you're a busy Orthodox Christian with a busy life, work, school, family, etc., and you may not have time to devote yourself to an intensive study at, let's say, the seminary or something like that, with all the various demands and deadlines that are common in those sort of schools, but you still want to learn, this is the place for you. You can learn online at a pace that works for you in a way that's tailored to your specific needs, your goals, your schedule. You can just click the link in the description and you can schedule a free online lesson, completely remote, right from home. If that's something that interests you, you can click the link and give it a try for free. So let's first go to the advantages of the tuning fork. So what can it be good for? Well, first of all, it could be good for to be used as a general reference point that can be helpful to give you what we could say a ballpark pitch, right? What do I mean by that? Although pitches in Byzantine music are somewhat relative, there's still a general ballpark for the appropriate pitch of each note. That is to say, you cannot chant the high knee at a pitch so low that it sounds like the lower the. That wouldn't make sense, and that would not be appropriate, right? So if you struggle to find a general starting pitch for a hymn, a tuning fork might be helpful. Not to mention maybe continuing to study the scales might also be helpful. And the key word here is a general pitch, right? Since we aren't singing Western music, you don't necessarily need to copy the exact pitch that the tuning fork is giving you. You can slightly adjust either higher or lower depending on various factors, which we will talk about in just a second. And this concept of finding a general common pitch is especially important if you're chanting as a group and you need to find a pitch that most people will be able to use together. Another advantage of the tuning fork is that it can help you to not drop the pitch or go flat as you're chanting, which some people have a tendency to do, especially while alternating between different chanters. So you can use the tuning fork to check your pitch throughout the chanting to make sure your pa or the or whatever has not dropped lower or higher than the note that you originally started. In other words, you want to make sure you're not drifting pitch, and the tuning fork can be somewhat helpful for that. Now, there are some disadvantages to using a tuning fork. And what are those? First thing to be aware of is that pitches in Byzantine music are relative. And what do I mean by that? I will give an example in a moment. So, people trained in Western music tend to have sometimes an incorrect approach to the tuning fork when they apply it to chanting. In other words, they treat it in an absolute way, basically, right? As in, they hit the tuning fork. Oh, this actually looks just like a tuning fork. This is this is to tighten some screws on my chair, but it's I just realized I had this. The tuning fork is like this. It's metal, but it's got like two things, and you tap it on a hard surface. People tap it on some bony surface on their body, and they put it up to their ear, and it gives you a note, and you hear that note, basically. Anyway, so in other words, they treat it in an absolute way. They go, this is the note that the tuning fork is giving me, therefore I must chant at this pitch, right? So what's the problem with this? Let me give you an example. Let's take the note kye, or A, which is a common note that is used for a lot of tuning forks. A lot of tuning forks will be like the note A, to be used as the basis, as the, ballpark or whatever. So let's think about kye, or A, in the context of plagal first mode. So we know we have plagal first mode from Pa, and we have plagal first mode from kye, right? So plagal first mode from kye would be like the Evlogitaria we chant on Sunday morning, right? And these are two different types of plagal first mode. Now let's think about the plagal first mode from Pa. Let's say we're chanting the Pasa Pnoi, the let everything that breathes praise the Lord, right? In plagal first mode. If you go on my YouTube channel, you'll actually see a recording of this. I think I titled it Lauds or something, in plagal first mode, and notice how it's based on Pa, and it goes up to kye. And listen to, if you listen to that recording, listen to where kye is in the recording, because since it starts on Pa, since Pa is the basis of the hymn in this plagal first mode, the kye is higher, it's up there, right? Now, we wouldn't be expected to chant the Evlogitaria, which are based on kye instead of Pa, using the same exact kye as we did in the other hymn, which was based on Pa. In other words, we wouldn't chant kye at the same pitch range, right? The same height for a hymn that's based on kye, that has kye as its bass note. We wouldn't chant at the same pitch as a hymn that is based on Pa. That would be weird, right? But if we rely too heavily on the tuning fork, which will give us the note kye, not taking into account what mode we're actually chanting and how that affects what pitch to start on. If we just go off of the tuning fork, we might feel compelled to just chant kye at the same pitch, regardless of what we're chanting. Plagal first mode from Pa or plagal first mode from kye. We'll just chant kye at the same pitch, basically, even though that might not be the right thing to do. Because again, in Byzantine music, the pitches are relative. It depends on what mode we're chanting. Another really good example is the loxastiko of the Dormition, the thearchionevmati, that goes through all the 8 modes, right? This is a perfect example of the pitches being relative. In other words, this hymn technically starts on Pa, depending on what version you use, but that Pa ends up sounding a lot like kye. And that Pa actually becomes kye when we go into the plagal first portion of the hymn. And then the Pa of plagal first mode in that hymn is actually way lower. Again, it's relative. It goes from first mode, then plagal first mode. The Pa changes because the Pa becomes kye. And then that Pa of plagal first mode is like low the. To see what I mean, I'm gonna post a recording of that hymn, so just stay tuned, and I'm gonna upload a recording of that hymn so you can listen to it. You can see what I'm talking about. So relying on a tuning fork, like in an isolated way, in this and similar scenarios, without understanding the concept of the relative pitches, will really throw you off. So beware of this. Just be aware when using the tuning fork. Like I said, you can't treat kje the same for both Pasa Pnoi and the Evlogitaria, or you're going to completely miss the point of how we use the 8 tones in Byzantine music. Along the same lines, using a tuning fork to find your pitch shouldn't be done in isolation. In other words, you need to be aware of the mode you're chanting in, the range of the hymn, as well as your personal voice type and vocal range, which differs from person to person. And to give an example of this, right? Because the tuning fork is going to give you the same note. It doesn't know who you are. It gives you the same note, and it doesn't care about your vocal range. So what I've heard is I hear some chanters who rely very heavily on the tuning fork to give them their pitch. But one thing I tend to notice is that some of these chanters don't sound as good in the higher range as they do in the lower. This is especially true for the female voice in general. Sometimes going too high can make the voice sound a bit shrill or harsh. And regardless of what the tuning fork is telling you, it might be a smarter idea to lower the pitch just a bit to better suit your voice as an individual. It's important to be aware not only of the theoretical musical sort of accuracy of your chanting, but also how others perceive how you sound. You should also be aware of the range of the specific hymn you're chanting. For example, first mode is different than plagal first mode, as plagal first mode tends to have a higher range, often reaching the upper pa. So you wouldn't necessarily start a first mode hymn at the same exact pitch as a plagal first mode hymn, because even though they're both based on pa, they're really two separate modes, and one has a much higher range which you need to kind of account for before you just go off of the tuning fork note. So what you'll actually be chanting matters way more than what the tuning fork is telling you to do. And you need to think about that before you choose your pitch. If my voice cannot reach a certain note, then ultimately what the tuning fork says is irrelevant. So, should you use a tuning fork to chant? Ultimately, it's up to you, and you have to assess your personal situation and see if it's something that might be helpful for you. Ultimately, the choice is yours as a chanter. So, what do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you know someone who might benefit from this video, send it to them, because the word of mouth sharing helps me. God bless you and have a wonderful Dormition fast.